What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast on LettermenRow.com, brought to you by our good friends at Buyers Auto. If you're looking for an auto, go to Buyers Auto, check it out. Today, I'm joined by Austin Ward as opposed to my normal cohort, Spencer Holbrook. I am Jeremy Birmingham. Austin is talking some recruiting stuff with me today because, well, the last few days have kind of shed a little light on some of the weirdness that happens around recruiting. And Austin likes to talk about weird things. So we're going to dive in there. Austin, we had a week now since the decommitment of Jordan Hancock from Clemson, and then 2 days since the flip to Ohio State. In that couple-day span, all we heard, Ohio State was pushing negative narratives, was telling Jordan Hancock that Dabo Swinney's a closet racist, that Clemson is this, that, and the other thing. And we had Jordan Hancock on Berminology to talk about his commitment, and he outright denied those things, which, of course, he would. It's not like he's going to say that, oh, that's what was said, on the record. But I can say, as Jordan and I spoke prior to the show and after the show, it was never anything about what could have been used against Clemson as really negative things, because Dabo Swinney in the last 6 weeks has sort of put himself on the proverbial chopping block, I guess, when it comes to the Black Lives Matter stuff, the T-shirts, all the other reasons that people are picking at him. But isn't negative recruiting just good recruiting?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you had me on to talk about the weird stuff, because even though this is not my day-to-day like you, I deal with these coaches all year, every year. I've been around the recruiting business side of it from a big picture perspective for a long time, and I don't view that there's any such thing as negative recruiting. There is only recruiting. And if anybody wants to spend part of their time bad-mouthing another program, well, you do that at the expense of highlighting the positives of your own. And everyone has their own approach. Like, I understand that comparisons are part of it, that, talking about what's going on in the world and what was going on in Clemson, South Carolina. Look, if Jordan Hancock wasn't talking about that sort of stuff with Ryan Day or Kerry Combs or Al Washington or anybody else that he talked to on the Ohio State staff, that would be stunning. It was a major part of the college football conversation. But even if he wasn't focused on that with Ohio State, any other coach, any other program that was talking to him about Clemson was probably going to be bringing that up. It's a negative situation for Clemson right now that they don't really seem to have an answer for. But that in itself doesn't qualify it as negative recruiting. There are inherent comparisons between what's going on at every program that's on the field and off the field. That's going to be highlighted to these players. And also Jordan Hancock or any other guy that we've dealt with, Evan Pryor, Travion Henderson, these guys are much more socially conscious and socially active than, you can compare it. But players that I talked to 10, 15 years ago, that wasn't really a major topic of recruitment. And it is now. And if you're talking about Ryan Day and his staff, I think that they have really, this is not to pat them on the back, but they were at the forefront of talking about all this stuff, whether it was coronavirus or Black Lives Matter or anything else. They've been very upfront and active about that. And to label that as negative recruiting or anything else just rings false to me.
Yeah, I think what happens is that people, fans, message board, residents, they see Tumiche Adeleye or Travion Henderson or anybody else in the Ohio State recruiting class tweeting at Jordan Hancock or Barrett Carter or any of these other kids who are committed to Clemson saying, listen, dude, pay attention. And people assume that that's a directive coming from the Ohio State staff. And I don't think maybe that the average fan at this point understands how much these kids are talking to each other on a day-to-day basis. That has nothing to do with football, nothing to do with what a staff is instructing commitments to do when it comes to recruiting other players. And, the reality is, as you said, this isn't about Ryan Day talking to Jordan Hancock. This is about Tumiche Adeleye or Evan Pryor. This is about these young men who are dealing with the same stuff across the country, having shared experiences and being able to talk to each other and say, hey, our coaching staff, our future coaching staff has done it this way. What's going on there? And again, I want to be very clear with Jordan Hancock, respect to him. I said in February he was going to end up committing to Ohio State. This was well before the stuff that happened with Dabo Swinney. So I don't think that this is a matter of Clemson being negatively recruited against because of some belief that there's an inherent racism at Clemson that isn't somewhere else. I mean, this is about Clemson. If we're talking about negative recruiting, it's about the high pressure, absolute, hold you up against the wall and say commit, commit, commit type of recruiting that Clemson does, as opposed more than what happened in the last 2 months.
And you and I, we were not in the room, obviously, with Dabo and Jordan Hancock when he took his visit in March. You've obviously talked to him a number of times, and I'm looking at this from outside perspective. There had to be some sort of sales pitch, and I won't speak for Jordan Hancock or Dabo Swinney about what they convinced him of in March, but you had talked to him prior to that and were expecting an Ohio State commitment with good reason. And he said on your own show at that point that he was 100% committed, that he had the Ohio State stuff in his house. Well, something changed then, and it had to have been, now that you look at this from the perspective of the last week, it had to be a sales pitch that was intensely effective in a short burst and not effective the longer away you got from it. So if you're going to say that one form is negative recruiting, I'm not accusing Dabo of that in any way. It was probably not something that was effective, and it tends to be categorized in that negative fashion as opposed to focusing on the positive elements that work from going to your own program now that can help you in the future, because this wore off. If that was a solely Clemson-based sales pitch, then it did not work. Is that negative recruiting? I don't think so. I'm not going to sit here and be a hypocrite about it. Recruiting is recruiting, and you're going to use any sales pitch that you think you can. But if you're using one that is not going to withstand the test of time, it's not going to be effective, and it's not going to help you keep a kid in the program beyond signing day.
Yeah, ironically, I talked to Jordan about this after we were done recording Birminology the other day. I asked him flat out, I said, if you had been able to visit other schools this summer, would you, or go anywhere, would you still be committed to Clemson? And he said yes. He would have been stronger in his commitment to Clemson if he'd been able to get over there 3-4 times this summer, as he would have as a commitment. So it's ironic in a way that the recruiting dead periods for most people who were saying, hey, Ohio State needs to get Jordan Hancock on campus to flip him, and which is why I told Spencer on this show 3 weeks ago, I didn't think that was the case, because the relationship with Ohio State was so good. I think it was actually hurting Clemson that he couldn't get back there and continue building that relationship with them that was in a short burst, as you mentioned, sort of forced on him in February and March. And the realness of the relationship with Ohio State is what carried him to this point where things ultimately changed. And I don't believe that it was because Ohio State was saying, Clemson does this, you shouldn't, be committed to Clemson. Ohio State was saying very simply, you've been on the top of our board since the first day we saw you on tape. What's changed? What changed for him? And I think ultimately, big picture here, you're talking about a player that had to make a decision that was based on a 90-minute drive to Clemson or a 90-minute flight to Ohio State. And at the time, he felt as a son, as a person who his mom was going through some medical issues, he decided he needed to stay closer to home. And I think as that cleared up, it just sort of gave him the opportunity to say, hey, maybe I should do what I needed to do for me, not for what I was being told I should do by other people.
And I think that it's important to, make this clear. With Jordan Hancock's situation in Clemson, I don't think that it can be considered negative recruiting, if you want to put that connotation on it, by either side. The only thing that I really consider to be negative, out of bounds work is lying to the kid.
Yeah.
And look, there are factors at every school that have to be brought up. It's not as if you go on campus and you're never going to talk about the other kids on the kids in a top 5 list. That's not realistic. And it's especially not realistic when we're talking about Ohio State and Clemson, because you're picking between the very best prospects in the country. If you want to, Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma, the same deal. They're going to be splitting hairs between each of those programs. They're the best in the country. So as long as everything about other programs, about your own program is true, which also goes back to your overriding philosophy of recruiting and the strength of relationships, that can't be built on a lie. if the family concerns and being close for Jordan Hancock initially led him to Clemson, some people might feel like, that pressure or using the family to their advantage, that's negative. It's not. I mean,
No.
they can believe that in their heart and be true. I don't think either program is guilty of that right here, and that these coaches were always upfront about the things that, in the end, are obviously going to be in their own self-interest.
Yeah, to me, recruiting, negative recruiting is like pizza, right? Like there's no bad pizza. So now, the only time it's bad pizza is if you give someone pizza and it's like the cauliflower crust pizza, and it's not really.
It's a lie.
It's a lie.
Cauliflower pizza is a lie.
Right. So that is not the same thing as telling someone, hey, pineapple doesn't really belong on pizza, but maybe that one fraction of the people say, you know what, it does belong on pizza, and therefore they're like, it's still pizza to me. Jordan Hancock clearly was enamored with the pizza at Clemson for a very short time before he realized maybe the pizza I've always liked is the pizza I should choose, even though both pieces of pizza are probably good.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But we've dealt with this before, right? Even with just Ohio State and Clemson. When Dabo says that Urban is at near the end of his career, it might have felt a little unsavory, and there was no way that Dabo could really prove it to be true, even if he wound up being right. But that's sort of the way that this works. You're going to have Dabo is younger than Urban Meyer. He was probably going to be in that longer. It's not like he specifically talked about Urban's health and used that against him, but that's the part of it. If you're going to compare these two, sometimes there are going to be things said about the other program that you might not like, but as long as it's done in the most truthful fashion, like if Urban stayed at Ohio State throughout the entirety of Jackson Carman at Clemson, then he might look back and be like, man, I made this choice for the wrong reason. And that's also why Jackson Carman said during his signing day press conference that Urban's longevity was low on his deciding factors. It's just a part of a conversation that came up and then got latched onto. It was not the entire sales pitch.
Yeah, I mean, the reality here is that for certain players, especially when you're dealing with Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, these are apples to apples comparisons. It all comes down to preference, and that's why, as we always say, it comes down to comfort and relationships. And the reason Ohio State was able to sway Jordan Hancock away from Clemson had nothing to do with negative recruiting. It had everything to do with comfort with the staff and the relationship he had with the Ohio State coaches, the Ohio State commits, and his family's appreciation for the way Ohio State handled itself. Now, on the other side of that, it is defensive back week here at Lettermen Row, and there's still one piece of the puzzle left on the defensive back board for Kerry Combs and Ohio State, and that's Derrick Davis, the country's number 2 ranked safety out of Pittsburgh, Gateway High School. And Derrick is now looking at it from a perspective of Ohio State has 6 defensive backs. If Ohio State's recruiting opponents are not telling him, hey, they have 6 defensive backs, that's probably a lot, maybe you should consider someone else, then they're idiots, right? I mean, is that negative recruiting, or is that just saying this is the fact of life? They have 6 defensive backs. It doesn't matter that you've been at the top of their board for 3 years. It doesn't matter that they love you and that they're holding this spot for you and have for 3 years. What matters is that they have 6 defensive backs, right?
And it would be malpractice for other coaches not to be pointing that out. They have to, again, that doesn't make it negative. It may come at the expense of Ohio State, but it's incumbent upon Ohio State then to say, explain their reasoning for why they would want to take 6 defensive backs, why waiting on the depth chart even to potentially only start for 1 year down the road, why that has worked out so well for a number of Ohio State defensive backs who became first-round draft picks under that very same circumstance. Maybe that could even happen again this year, which if you're talking about Cameron Brown and Sevyn Banks and maybe Josh Proctor, suddenly it makes a lot more sense why you would need that number. And as long as Ohio State can clearly articulate that plan to combat whatever they may perceive as attacks from other programs, that's fine. That's their job. If other teams are trying to negatively recruit based on your numbers or anything like that, all you have to do is have a plan for why that works. Ohio State can't lie about it, because if the 6 defensive back plan isn't executed and they can't describe the way that Davis could see the field or that the numbers might change based on the fact that Shaun Wade or the entire secondary might leave for the NFL after this season. Well, he won't stay for 3 or 4 years to play for Ohio State. This is why I say that and I'm not trying to steal your own thunder here, but with the relationships, the truth has to win out. And It is true that they're going to sign 6, but the only answer Ohio State can have for that is why they want him to be number 6.
Well, for him, it'd be number 7. That's the thing. What they're looking at here is to say, Derrick, we have recruited you for 3 years. We told you from the start, we will wait for you till the end. There'll be a spot for you. It's not to say we're not going to take other people, but it is to say, look at Penn State. They have 2 safeties committed. We have 2 safeties committed. It's all the same. Now, the question is, who do you believe? And that's ultimately what recruiting comes down to. And that's why I refuse to believe in negative recruiting, because it just simply comes down to who do you trust? And if you trust Ryan Day and Kerry Combs more than you trust James Franklin, he's going to pick Ohio State. If he doesn't, he's going to pick Penn State. The outcome is going to be the same in the recruiting class. Penn State has 14 commits. Ohio State has 19. Penn State has 5 defensive backs committed. Ohio State has 6. Like, what's the difference, really? There is no major difference other than one of them keeps winning games and winning Big Tens, and one of them keeps losing games they shouldn't lose. Now, other than that, what is different between the 2 scenarios? He's 2.5 hour drive from Ohio State, 2.5 hour drive from Penn State. He's the defensive back, the 3rd safety in either class. Like, there's all these things that can be said. So what matters is who you believe and who you trust. And that's why negative recruiting, as long as you're not telling someone cauliflower crust pizza is pizza, then everything else is pretty much fair game.
Well, thanks for the gentle correction on the actual numbers.
Sure.
I'm obviously out of date on that, but the point still stands. If you're going to take 3 safeties and 7 defensive backs, then you still have to have a plan and a reason why Davis should sign up to be that.
Sure. It's easy for Ohio State to point at the depth chart and say, we have Marcus Hooker, Josh Proctor, and that's it at safety. So this is why you should be coming here. I mean, it's also easy enough to say, as some people suggest, that Jalen Johnson in the class of 2021 ultimately is a linebacker. So maybe the Buckeyes in their big picture only have 5 defensive backs. You just don't know how these kids grow and develop and how everything plays out. And the reality is, in 2017, Ohio State took 6 defensive backs, and it turned out pretty okay when you have Jeff Okudah, Shaun Wade, Kendall Sheffield, Isaiah Pryor, Amir Reep, Marcus Williamson. You had 6 of the top 100 players in the country all playing in the defensive backfield. Okudah, Wade, all these guys were safeties in high school, and they all ended up being first-round corners. So,
well, you also have attrition, and sometimes that's positional attrition as well. If we're talking about, the one you mentioned, some of these guys may go to a bullet, some may go to linebacker, some may grow out of the defensive backfield. And again, that's why a clearly articulated plan is important for Derrick Davis. It's important for Kerry Combs. It's important for Matt Barnes. It's important for all of them to lay it on the table, because if it's not correct, then you will see the transfers. You'll have problems on your roster. Just because you got him on signing day doesn't mean you'll ever reap the rewards of having him on your team if you don't know how you're going to use it and how that impacts the kids you already have on campus and the kids that you want to sign in the class after that. And I think that that's one thing that Ohio State does as well as anybody, is they don't just haphazardly pluck guys in or pitch them on instant playing time or anything like that can be quickly disproven once they get there. They've been remarkably successful at keeping guys in the program for a long time and buying into that. We're talking about, just for this particular year with Cameron Brown and Sevyn Banks, they've had to wait their turn for extensive playing time, and they may well be one-year guys who go off to the NFL. That exacerbates the need. Ohio State's anticipated that a number of times, which is why they've been able to reload as frequently as they have under Kerry Combs.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a group that the Buckeyes are doing this for a reason. It's not like they're waiting. It's not like Kerry Combs and Ryan Day sat down when Kerry got to campus in January and was like, you know what? Hell, let's just take 7 DBs for fun. Let's see what happens. It's easy to point to the roster if you're Kerry Combs and say, I was not here for this stuff and this stuff and this stuff, so I need to bring in my guys. And I think, again, when you're talking about Derrick Davis, 3 different defensive coordinators have recruited him for Ohio State, 2 different head coaches, 4 different defensive backs coach over the last 3 years. It's pretty obvious that they think that he is a player that is too good to pass up no matter what. So, bottom line, there is no negative recruiting. There is recruiting and there is lying. So, who do you trust? How it plays out? That's what's ultimately going to make the decision for Derrick Davis. And I was told just a little bit ago on Tuesday afternoon that from his father that they think the possibility is a September decision. So as we wait for the next wave of updates from the NCAA about recruiting dead periods, that could have a major impact on Derrick Davis's decision. If nobody's allowed to make any visits, I think the 8 visits he's taken to Ohio State and the 10 visits he's taken to Penn State or vice versa are enough of a sample size for him to be able to make a confident choice. So ultimately, you're going to see him choose between those 2 schools. I don't care about the top 7 schools that he listed on Twitter 2 weeks ago. Those mean nothing. It's Ohio State or Penn State. And again, you're talking apples to apples, oranges to oranges, pears to pears, pizza to pizza. Who do you trust?
You don't trust cauliflower pizza. That's it.
Don't ever trust cauliflower pizza. That's Austin Ward. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This has been Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast on LettermenRow.com, brought to you by Byers Auto. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe below to get the latest videos from Lettermen Row.
We got Letterman Live, we've got the practice report, we got rapid reaction. Hey, and you know we got Buck IQ with Zach Bourne.
For sure. We got recruiting breakdowns with Berm. We got whatever you need. Ohio State football and Ohio State athletics, we've got you covered here at Lettermen Row.